Ladies and gentlemen, we need to prepare for emergency landing. That announcement sent a chill through the plane, and Clint Eastwood, seated quietly in 14A, slowly removed his reading glasses. The pilot's voice was shaky, and so was the cabin. A mother clutched her baby. A teenager cried into his sleeve. But Clint? He stood up, calm, controlled. Then, the twist nobody saw coming. The co-pilot had passed out. With only one trained pilot left and no time to turn back, panic took over the crew. But Clint made his way to the cockpit, and what he said next shocked everyone. "I flew reconnaissance in Korea. You just need steady hands, and someone who isn't afraid." That sentence hit like thunder. People gasped. Cameras started, recording. And just when everyone thought it couldn't get more intense, the pilot looked at Clint and said, "Then you better take the left seat." Clint eased into the cockpit, eyes locked on the horizon. The pilot briefed him in seconds, altitude dropping, crosswinds fierce, fuel low. But Clint didn't flinch. His hands gripped the controls like it was 1952 all over again. Meanwhile, in the cabin, passengers were praying, recording their final messages, holding each other in silence. Suddenly, a violent jolt rocked the plane. A lightning bolt had just struck the tail. Gasps echoed. The cabin lights flickered. Even the pilot's voice cracked. But Clint's stayed steady. "We're not dying today. Not on my watch." He adjusted flaps, called out commands, and made the kind of moves you'd only see in war movies. But this wasn't a movie. This was real. At 3,000 feet, he made a final dive maneuver, a move that even the pilot said would have torn most planes apart. But Clint pulled it off, barely. The runway came into view, and every soul on board held their breath. As the wheels touched down, the entire cabin erupted in cheers, tears, and stunned silence. But the real shock came minutes later, when airport officials rushed in, not to escort Clint to safety, but to hand him a letter. It was from a passenger's daughter, a soldier stationed overseas who had sent a message mid-flight. "If I never see my mom again, tell her I love her." That woman survived because of Clint's actions. And the twist? The soldier was part of a humanitarian mission, saving war orphans across Eastern Europe. One life saved in the sky now meant dozens more on the ground would live too. News exploded. The media called it the flight that saved a generation. Clint didn't give a speech. He simply looked at the mother, handed her back the letter, and said, "Now you'll get to say it yourself." The room went quiet. Even TSA officers had tears in their eyes. The next morning, headlines everywhere screamed the same thing. Clint Eastwood saves flight, ignites global movement. But what came after wasn't just admiration, it was action. Within 48 hours, survivors of that flight launched a fundraiser, not for Clint but for the very cause he believed in: rescue and rehabilitation of war-zone children. What started as a small tribute exploded into a global wave. Millions poured in. A non-profit was born, Sky Hope International, with Clint Eastwood's name etched on its founding plaque. But the most powerful moment came quietly. Clint visited a rehab center built from those funds and saw a wall filled with crayon drawings from rescued children. One picture showed an old man flying a plane through a storm, his smile drawn bigger than his body. Underneath it, the child had written, "He flew us to hope." Clint stood there silent, until his voice cracked. "That's the only review I'll ever need." Months later, at a global peace summit in Geneva, Clint Eastwood was invited to speak. He walked up slowly, no teleprompter, no flashy intro, just truth. "I didn't save that plane to be remembered," he began. "I did it because fear didn't deserve to win." The hall went silent. Then he paused, looked at the crowd, and said, "But if one terrified child sleeps peacefully tonight because of what we did, then maybe that flight wasn't a disaster. Maybe it was a beginning." Cameras captured tears in the eyes of world leaders, but the biggest twist came next. A young girl walked on stage, handed Clint a folded note, and whispered, "You saved my mom." It was the same girl whose mother Clint helped land that plane. The note read, "I want to be a pilot," just like the man who refused to sit back. The crowd rose to their feet. Applause thundered. A standing ovation not just for a man, but for a moment that reminded the world what courage looks like when everything's falling apart.